The first thing I remember about that night is the sound of the moon bells. They chimed softly in the branches above the clearing, a silver music that made the air feel thinner, sharper, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Lanterns of living light floated among the trees, petals of luminescent blossoms drifting down like slow snow. It should have been the most beautiful night of my life. Instead, it became the moment everything I thought I was shattered like glass. I stood at the center of the moonlit ring, the ancient circle of white stone where countless unions had been sealed before mine. My dress was the color of starlight on water, woven by my mother and aunts from spider silk and moon thread. My hair, long and pale as frost, was braided with tiny crystals that caught the light of the twin moons above. Elven maidens watched from the edge of the clearing, whispering, behind their hands, their eyes flicking from me to the empty space beside me where my betrothed should have been. His name was Kalen. For years I had trained my heart to beat softer when he entered a room, to hide the way my pulse stumbled under his gaze. Our families had arranged the betrothal when we were still young, but somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that the arrangement had turned into something real. He smiled at me in the training grounds. He brought me star fruit in the summer. He touched my hand once when I slipped on the river stones and held on just a heartbeat longer than necessary. I took these small, fragile moments and built a future out of them. Now the moments stretched into an aching silence. The high priestess cleared her throat. Moonlight traced the markings on her brow as she lifted her staff. The assembled guests shifted, their silks whispering like restless leaves. At the far end of the clearing, the royal guard stood in rigid lines, armor gleaming. And behind them, on a raised terrace of crystal and root, sat the one person I had never expected to take much notice of my life at all, the Elf King. He watched us with the stillness of old trees and deep water. His hair, pale gold, fell loose over his shoulders, catching the moonlight in a way that made it look almost white. His crown was not a band of metal, but living branches and glowing stones, woven from the very heart of the forest. I had seen him from a distance, of course, at festivals and proclamations, but never this closely. His eyes were what unsettled me. They were not cold, but they were unyielding, like light reflecting on ice. They missed nothing. The priestess spoke my name, Lirael, daughter of Arendor, and the trees echoed it back in a whisper. It should have been, followed by Kalen's name. It was not. Silence fell again. My palms were damp. I stole a glance toward the path that led to the clearing, expecting, hoping, begging in my heart to see him running toward us, out of breath, with some desperate explanation. There was nothing, only the soft movement of branches and the distant ripple of the river. Whispers grew sharper. I heard a girl laugh, quickly smothered. Someone coughed. My father's jaw tightened. My mother stared straight ahead, as if she could hold the entire scene together through sheer will. The priestess looked up at the royal terrace, as if silently pleading for guidance. The Elf King rose. The clearing seemed to bow with him. Even the lantern lights dipped. My breath caught as he descended from the terrace, each step measured, unhurried, as if he had already known this would happen, and had been waiting for this exact moment. The guards shifted aside in perfect synchronization, opening a path that led straight to me. When he reached the moonlit ring, he paused just outside the circle, regarding me with those pale, unreadable eyes. "Your betrothed has not come," he said. His voice was low, carrying easily through the clearing. It was not cruel. That almost made it worse. I swallowed. "No, my lord." His gaze lingered on my face, then flicked briefly to the empty place at my side, then to the sky, as if measuring the angle of the moons. There was a sadness there, or perhaps I only wanted to imagine it. "The Moonlit Betrothal is not a mere celebration," he said, speaking now to the gathered elves as much as to me. "It is a vow made under the witness of all that lives in this realm. To abandon such a vow without cause is not only a wound to the heart, but a stain upon honor." The words fell like stones. I could feel the guests shrink back, feel the shame burning against my skin even though it was not mine to bear. I wanted the ground to open and swallow me. I wanted the lanterns to blow out, the moons to hide, anything to keep all these eyes from watching me stand alone in a place meant for two. I lowered my gaze, blinking hard against the sting in my eyes. I would not cry in front of the Elf King. I would not cry at all. I told myself that over and over, as if the words were a spell. Then his hand lifted. He extended it toward me, palm upward, as if offering me a choice I did not understand. "Step forward, Lirael," he said. "You will not be left standing alone in a circle of promise." The world narrowed to the space between us. My legs felt unsteady as I moved, one slow step after another, until I crossed the edge of the moonlit ring and stood before him. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, louder even than the moon bells overhead. When his fingers closed gently around my wrist, the air changed. It thickened, vibrated, as if invisible strings had been plucked all at once. Light poured down from the twin moons in sudden intensity, washing the clearing in silver so bright that some of the guests cried out and shielded their eyes. Pain flared across my skin where his hand touched me. Not burning, not freezing, but something older, wilder, as if the very roots of the forest had reached up through my veins. I gasped, but his grip was steady, anchoring me. When the light finally softened, when the air settled and I dared to look, I saw it. A mark now glowed on the inside of my wrist, right where his fingers had rested. It was a delicate pattern of interwoven branches and stars, pulsing faintly with my heartbeat. Not a wound, not a bruise, a claim. The elf king looked down at the mark, then back into my eyes. "From this night," he said quietly, "you are no longer merely abandoned at the Moonlit Betrothal. You are marked by the elf king." I did not yet know whether that was a blessing, a curse, or something far more dangerous. I only knew that my life, which had been so carefully planned around a single union, had just been torn from its path and set on a course that would change not only my fate, but the fate of the realm itself. If you want to follow my journey and discover what this mark truly means, remember to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and how you felt during the Moonlit Betrothal. No one moved at first. The mark on my wrist still pulsed with a faint inner light, as if it were a second heartbeat trying to sync with my own. I stood there in the moonlit ring, aware of hundreds of eyes on me, and yet I felt oddly distant from them, as if I were watching myself from somewhere high in the branches above. The priestess was the first to find her voice. She lowered her staff and bowed her head to the elf king. "The mark of the sovereign," she murmured. "It has not appeared in an age." Her words ran through the crowd like wind through tall grass. The sovereign's mark. I had heard the stories as a child, tales of chosen warriors and seers, of those who bore a connection to the throne that could not be forged by bloodlines alone. But those were old legends told near hearthfires, not something that happened to ordinary elves like me. The elf king released my wrist, though the echo of his touch remained. He lifted his gaze to the assembled nobles and families. "This betrothal is dissolved," he declared. "Kaelin, son of Therion, has broken his vow before it was sealed. His absence will be addressed." There was iron in his voice now. Somewhere in the crowd, I heard a sharp intake of breath, a muffled sob, the rustle of someone retreating. I wondered if Kaelin's family was present, shrinking under the weight of royal displeasure. A part of me wanted justice for what he had done. Another part still searched for some hidden reason, some explanation that could make sense of the pain. The elf king turned back. To me, his expression unreadable. "As for you, Lirael," he said, "the moons have witnessed a different claiming. This mark binds you to the heart of the realm. Its meaning will unfold in time. Until then, you will be under my protection." Under his protection. The words rang strangely in my ears. I had assumed that, after this humiliation, I would be allowed to flee home, to bury my face in my pillow and let silent tears soak into the fabric, until dawn. Instead, I was being pulled deeper into something I did not understand. He inclined his head to me, just enough to acknowledge my shock without inviting protest. Then he turned and strode back toward the royal terrace. The guards fell in behind him, and the spell over the clearing broke. The guests began to murmur again, voices rising and overlapping. Some pretended not to look at me, which only made their curiosity more obvious. Others stared openly, as if I had grown a second head. My parents pushed through the crowd to reach me. My mother's hands cupped my face, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Lirael," she whispered, "are you hurt?" I shook my head, though I was not entirely sure the answer was true. "No, not in any way I can show you." My father's gaze dropped to my wrist. The mark had faded to a softer glow now, its pattern distinct but no longer blazing. He swallowed, his throat working. "This will change everything," he said quietly. It was not accusation, not blame, just the sober recognition of a man who understood how fragile the balance of power could be. We left the clearing amid a path that opened reluctantly, as if the other elves were torn between wanting to touch me and wanting to avoid me entirely. I kept my head high, because if I let it fall even a little, I knew my composure would shatter. When we reached our home, the familiar sight of the ivy-covered walls almost undid me. The lantern outside the door still burned with its soft blue flame, oblivious to the storm that had torn through my life. Inside, everything was as it had been that morning. The woven mats, the carved shelves, the faint scent of herbs from my mother's work table. The sameness of it was almost cruel. My mother guided me to a chair and pressed a cup of warm leaf brew into my hands. My father paced near the window, looking out into the night as if expecting soldiers or messengers to appear at any moment. "Did you know the legends of the Sovereign's Mark?" I asked, my voice low. He stopped pacing, his back still turned. "Everyone knows them," he replied. "Few believe they will ever matter in their own lifetime." "What do they say?" I pressed. He turned then, his face lined deeper than it had been that morning. "They say the mark appears when the realm stands at a crossroads," he said. "When the forest itself chooses an instrument, those who bear it are bound to the fate of the king, for good or ill. For good or ill." The words slid inside me like cold water. "What if I do not want to be bound to him?" I whispered. "I did not ask for this." My mother's hand brushed my hair back from my face, gentle, trembling just a little. "Fate rarely asks permission," she said. "But it is not only fate that will shape what comes next, Lirael. Your choices still matter. Do not forget that." That night, sleep did not come easily. When it finally did, it was not the soft, dreamless rest I craved. I stood once more in the moonlit ring, but the lanterns were extinguished and the moons had turned blood red. The trees whispered in a tongue I could not fully understand, though fragments reached me like echoes, marked, chosen, tested. In the dream, the Elf King stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes no longer pale but burning with golden fire. The mark on my wrist blazed in response, sending lines of light threading up my arm, across my chest, into my heart. I tried to pull away, but roots had grown around my feet, holding me in place. When I woke, the room was still dark, the first hint of dawn just brushing the horizon. My wrist throbbed softly, the mark bright enough to see in the dimness. It was no dream-born illusion. I had only just sat up when a firm knock sounded at our door. My father moved quickly, but I was already on my feet, heart pounding. Through the thin wall, I heard a voice, crisp and formal. "By order of His Majesty King Elarian," the messenger announced. "Lirael, daughter of Arendor, is summoned to the palace at once." The mark on my wrist flared in answer, as if it had been waiting for those words. The journey to the palace began before the sun had fully risen. Mist clung to the forest floor, curling around the hooves of the moon heart that drew the royal carriage. I had never ridden in anything so finely crafted. Its frame was woven from living branches that shifted with our movement, leaves glimmering faintly as if touched by starlight, even in the gray of dawn. 2 royal guards rode ahead, their armor quiet but unmistakable. Another pair followed behind. I sat between my parents on the simple wooden bench by our door as the carriage came to a stop, feeling as though the world had sped up and I had been left standing still. A messenger stepped down, his cloak bearing the silver crest of the crown. His eyes flicked to my wrist, and I saw the moment recognition struck. His posture straightened, his expression humbled. "Lirael, daughter of Arendor," he said, bowing. "His Majesty requests your presence at the palace without delay. You will come under royal escort." My mother's hand tightened around mine. "She is still in shock," she said quietly. "Can it not wait?" The messenger hesitated, but only for a moment. "The mark cannot wait," he replied. "Its awakening must be understood. The king will not keep her longer than necessary." The mark, as if it were a separate being now, a small, luminous creature curled against my skin. I looked down at it, the intricate design of branches and stars softly pulsing, and felt again that strange sense of being inhabited by something greater than myself. I rose. "I will go," I said, before my parents could argue. My father stepped forward and drew me into a brief, fierce embrace. "Remember who you are," he murmured. "You are not only what others see in that mark." My mother kissed my forehead, her lips cool and trembling. "Listen more than you speak," she whispered, "but do not let them silence your heart." I carried their words with me as I climbed into the carriage. The door closed, and for a moment it felt like the end of one life and the beginning of another. The wheels rolled forward, crunching softly over the forest path, and the only sound inside was the steady beat of my own heart. As we moved through the lower districts, elves paused in their morning tasks to watch us pass. Some nodded respectfully to the royal crest, others pointed, eyes widening when they saw me seated within. Though the carriage was partially veiled, I knew how quickly whispers traveled. Lirael, abandoned at the Moonlit Betrothal. Lirael, now marked by the Elf King. By the time the trees thinned and the palace came into view, my throat felt dry. I had seen it from a distance many times, rising from the heart of the forest like a living mountain of crystal and root. Up close, it stole my breath. The palace was grown, not built. Great trunks spiraled upward and outward, branching into arches and balconies and bridges. Veins of luminous stone ran through the wood like captured lightning, pulsing faintly with the lifeblood of the realm. Waterfalls spilled from unseen heights, casting shimmering curtains that caught the early light. It was less a structure and more a living symphony. The carriage passed beneath an arch of woven branches that parted for us, as if recognizing the royal crest. We entered a vast courtyard filled with flowering trees and pools of still water. Elves in fine robes crossed the flagstones, their conversations pausing as we arrived. I could feel their eyes on me even when I looked straight ahead. The messenger opened the door and offered his hand to help me down. "From here, you walk as one called," he said softly. "Do not be afraid of looking up." I was not sure whether he meant the height of the palace or the gaze of the king. Inside, marble-like roots formed the floor beneath my feet, smooth and cool. Light filtered through crystal windows in shades of green and gold. We climbed a sweeping staircase that seemed to grow from the trunk of the central tree itself. At the top, 2 great doors stood open, leading into the throne hall. I had never been beyond the outer audience chambers. This was a place reserved for matters of great import, for council and crisis. I felt very small as I walked across the threshold. The hall was vast yet strangely intimate, its walls lined with tall, living pillars that reached toward a canopy of leaves. Soft light drifted down from above, as if the forest itself were watching. At the far end, upon a raised platform of intertwining roots and crystal, sat the Elf King, Lirael. I knew his name now, though I would not dare speak it aloud without title. He sat with the ease of someone who knew the weight of a crown down to the last leaf and stone. His pale hair fell around his shoulders, and the living crown of branches and gems rested lightly on his brow. Beside him stood 2 advisors, robed and solemn. As I approached, the murmur of voices dulled, the air thickened, the mark on my wrist warmed, as if drawn to him. I stopped at the foot of the platform and bowed deeply, my eyes on the polished roots beneath my feet. "Your Majesty," I said, hoping my voice did not betray the tremor in my chest. "Rise, Lirael," he said. When I straightened, his gaze was already fixed on my wrist. He lifted a hand, and with a subtle gesture invited me closer. My legs carried me up the steps, almost of their own accord. "May I?" he asked, indicating my hand. I nodded. He took my wrist gently, turning it so the mark was fully visible. It pulsed once, brighter, in response to his touch, sending a ripple of sensation up my arm. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "It resonates," one of the advisors murmured. "Stronger than the last recorded instance." "The last recorded instance was 3 centuries ago," the other replied, "in very different circumstances." The Elf King silenced them with a glance, then looked back at me. "Tell me exactly what you felt when the mark appeared," he said. "Everything you remember." I did as he asked, recounting the sudden flood of light, the strange pain that was not pain, the sense that roots had grown inside my veins. I spoke of the way the air had changed, the way the clearing had become something more than a mere place. As I spoke, his eyes never left my face, as if reading not only my words, but the spaces between them. "When I touched you," he said slowly, "I intended to spare you humiliation and uphold the sanctity of the moonlit ring. I did not call for the mark. I did not summon it. It answered something beyond my will." A chill slid down my spine. "Then what called it?" I asked. He released my wrist and sat back, his expression growing more distant, as if he were looking through time rather than at me. "There are prophecies older than my reign," he said, "older than my father's and his father's. They speak of a union broken under moonlight, of a heart abandoned and then bound anew by the forest itself. They speak of one who is marked, not by choice, but by necessity, one whose bond to the king will either preserve the realm or see it fall." My breath caught. "I never sought to bind myself to a king," I said, quietly. "I wanted only a simple life, a family, a place in my own corner of the forest." His gaze softened, just enough that I glimpsed the man beneath the crown. "I did not seek this either," he admitted. "Yet here we stand, with the mark burning between us." Silence stretched, heavy and fragile. Finally he rose from the throne and descended the remaining steps until he stood before me, close enough that I could see tiny flecks of green in his pale irises. "You will remain in the palace for a time," he said. "We must understand the nature of this bond, its strengths and its dangers. You will be instructed in the history of the mark, the ways in which it can be wielded, and the ways in which it can be resisted." "Resisted?" I echoed. "The mark does not only grant power," he said. "It also invites those who would seek to corrupt it. There are forces beyond our borders that have waited for such a moment. If you remain untrained, you will be a beacon to them." I swallowed hard. And if I refuse? The Elf King's expression grew solemn. Then you walk blind through a forest where predators already know your scent. I will not force you, Lirael, but I will not pretend refusal is without consequence. I thought of the whispering trees in my dream, the blood-red moons, the roots holding my feet in place. I thought of my parents in our small home, of the life I had imagined with Kaelin, now shattered and scattered like fallen petals. Somewhere deep inside, past the fear and the grief, something steadier answered. A quiet thread of resolve I had not known was there. Then teach me, I said. If this mark has claimed me, I will at least learn how not to let it destroy everything I love. For the first time, a flicker of something like respect crossed the Elf King's face. Very well, he said. The path you have chosen will not be easy, but it is yours. And from this day forward, Lirael, you do not walk it alone. My quarters in the palace were nothing like my room at home, yet they held a quiet that reminded me of the forest at dawn. The walls were grown from pale wood that curved in soft arcs, veined with faintly glowing lines of crystal. A balcony opened onto a view of the upper canopy, where leaves caught the light, and turned it into shifting patterns across the floor. It was beautiful, but I had never felt more out of place. The first days blurred into a rhythm of observation and instruction. Servants moved around me with courteous reserve, unsure whether to treat me as a guest, a prisoner, or something entirely new. When they bowed, their eyes always darted to my wrist, and I found myself tucking my hand into my sleeve just to escape their gaze. I was not left alone for long. On the second morning, just as the sun's first rays touched the highest branches, a knock sounded at my door. "Enter," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The elf who stepped inside was older than my parents, his hair a deep silver rather than gold or white, braided in intricate patterns along his back. His eyes were a clear, thoughtful gray, and his robes bore subtle markings of rank that I could not fully decipher. "Lirael," he said, bowing with measured respect. "I am Mareth. The king has appointed me as your instructor in matters of the mark." "Instructor," I repeated. The word felt strange on my tongue. "Have you borne the mark yourself?" A faint smile touched his lips, tinged with something like regret. "No, none living have, but I have studied every record, every fragment of lore that speaks of it, and now, it seems, we will be writing new pages. Together," he gestured toward the balcony. "Come." The mark responds keenly to light and life. It is best to begin where both are abundant. I followed him outside. The air was cool and fragrant, filled with the scent of dew and leaves. From here, I could see the forest stretching in all directions, a sea of green and silver. The palace rose around us like the trunk of an impossibly vast tree, its branches cradling bridges and towers. "Show me your wrist," Mareth said gently. I hesitated, then drew back my sleeve. The mark glimmered more brightly than it had at dawn, its pattern of branches and stars shifting almost imperceptibly, as if it were breathing. Mareth's gaze sharpened. "It is already changing," he murmured. "Adapting. To what?" I asked. "To you, to him, to the balance between you," he replied. "The mark is not a brand. It is a living bond. It ties your life thread to the king's, but not in a simple way. It is not merely that if one of you dies, so does the other. The connection is deeper, more layered." A chill passed through me. "Layered how?" He studied my face, as if weighing how much truth I was ready to hear. "You will feel his presence at times," he said, "his emotions in faint echoes, his pain, if it is great enough, and he may feel yours. In moments of danger, the mark may respond of its own accord, weaving your strengths together, amplifying what you can do alone." I swallowed. "So I am not only bound to him by prophecy and politics, I am bound to him in my very bones." "In your spirit," Mareth corrected softly, "and in the root system of the forest itself. The mark drew power from the realm when it awakened. That is why the light was so intense. It is why the king could not control it. Some decisions are made by forces older than thrones." He guided me through breathing exercises, through focusing on the sensation of the mark, first as a point of awareness, then as a thread extending outward. At first, I felt nothing but the pulse of my own blood. Then, slowly, something shifted. It felt like standing at the edge of a vast lake at night, unable to see the far shore, but hearing the faint lap of water, the distant call of unseen creatures. There was a presence out there, steady, disciplined, contained, but touched by a current of sorrow I had not expected. I knew instinctively that it was him. I flinched, breaking the fragile connection. The balcony came back into focus, solid and bright. I realized I was breathing too quickly. "Enough for now," Mareth said, his voice kind. "You reached him. That is progress." "Does he feel it when I do that?" I asked. "Not always," Mareth said, "but if the bond, continues to deepen. There will be moments he cannot ignore. The idea of the Elf King feeling my fear, my confusion, my raw and jagged grief made my skin prickle. I had spent years learning to hide my heart. Now the forest itself seemed determined to lay it bare. Days passed. Lessons continued. Mareth taught me to ground myself in the living energy of the palace, to let the mark drink from it without overwhelming me. He spoke of ancient bearers whose marks had manifested in different ways. One who could sense corruption in the roots of trees. Another who could strengthen the wards around the borders with a touch. "What will mine do?" I asked one evening, when the sky was painted in shades of violet and gold. "What it must," he replied. "The mark shapes itself around the needs of its time, and around the truth of the one who bears it." I lay awake that night, wondering what my truth was. A girl who had once believed herself loved, a woman abandoned before all her kin, a soul tethered to a king she barely knew. Beneath all that, something else stirred, an anger at the way my life had been pulled and twisted without my consent. One afternoon, as Mareth and I practiced focusing the mark's energy, the air changed without warning. A prickling ran along my spine, and the glow on my wrist flared suddenly bright, like a flare of lightning under my skin. I staggered. "Mareth," I gasped. "Something is wrong." He reached for me, but even before his hand touched my shoulder, my vision blurred. The balcony, the sky, the forest, all of it dissolved into a rush of shadow and light. For a heartbeat, I was nowhere and everywhere. Then I stood. No, not stood, but saw, as if through someone else's eyes, the throne hall, the Elf King on the dais, a figure cloaked in dark green, standing before him, head bowed. The shadows around the stranger writhed, too deep and dense for mere cloth. They curled at the edges of my awareness, reaching toward the king like hungry fingers. I felt a chill that did not belong to the hall itself, but to an intrusion, a wrongness that tasted of iron and ash. The stranger lifted their head. For an instant, I saw eyes that were not wholly their own, glinting with a cold, alien intelligence. The wingty shadows lunged. Without thinking, I reached out with the mark. Light surged from me, not from my body, but from the bond itself, racing along an invisible thread straight toward the throne hall. It met the encroaching darkness with a crackle like thunder. The vision shattered. I collapsed to my knees on the balcony, my chest heaving, my wrist burning as if branded. Mareth knelt beside me, his face tight with concern. "What did you see?" he demanded. I tried to speak, but the words tangled. At that moment, the door to my chambers flew open. A guard stood there, breathless, hand on the hilt of his blade, eyes wide. "The king," he said. "He sent me to fetch you at once. There was an incident in the throne hall. He said you would understand." The mark on my wrist still glowed fiercely. Somewhere in the depths of the palace, the Elf King had felt my light collide with the darkness, reaching for him. Our bond was no longer a dormant mark on my skin. It had just interfered with an attempt on his life. I did not walk to the throne hall so much as race, though the guards insisted on surrounding me as if I were made of glass. The corridors blurred past, all twisting branches and glowing veins of crystal. The mark on my wrist still burned, not painfully now, but insistently, as if tugging me forward. I could feel a faint echo of the fear that had surged through the hall moments before, like the aftertaste of smoke. When the doors to the throne hall opened, the first thing I saw was the scorch mark. It spread across the polished roots in a dark, jagged stain, as if a piece of night had been dropped and then hastily extinguished. The air still smelled faintly of ozone and something sour beneath it, like spoiled sap. The Elf King stood near the base of the dais, his posture straight but tense. Several guards ringed the spot where the stranger must have stood, their blades drawn, eyes sharp. The cloaked figure I had seen in the vision was gone. His gaze lifted as I entered, and for a brief instant, I felt a jolt inside my chest, as if the bond had snapped taut between us. The mark on my wrist flared in answer. "Leave us," he said to the guards and advisors. "Mareth may remain." The hall emptied quickly, footsteps fading into the distance. Only Mareth stayed by the door, his expression grave. I walked forward, my palms damp, my thoughts racing. "You felt it," the king said. It was not a question. I nodded. "I saw it as it happened, or almost as it happened. The shadows reaching for you. The eyes," I swallowed. And then something in me reached back. His brows drew together slightly. "Describe what you saw." I told him, as precisely as I could. The unnatural density of the shadows, the sense that something was riding within the stranger, rather than merely cloaked around them, the lunge of darkness toward him, and the instinctive way I had pushed the light of the mark outward. As I spoke, his gaze never left my face. When I finished, he lifted his hand. Come closer. I hesitated only a heartbeat before stepping toward him. He reached for my wrist again, fingers resting near the glowing pattern. The moment he touched me, a wave of sensation surged through the bond. It was like opening a door into a storm. For a heartbeat, I felt what he had felt. The sudden chill when the shadow lunged, the instinctive summoning of his own power, the shock when something bright and wild slammed into the darkness from an unexpected angle. Me, I gasped, and he released my wrist at once. The echo faded, leaving my own emotions jangling like shaken bells. You were not only watching, he said slowly. You intervened. The mark amplified your reaction and forced your light through the bond. Did I overstep? I asked, the question out before I could stop it. I did not mean to interfere with your magic. It just happened. Ilarion studied me in silence for a long moment. The hall seemed to lean in around us, the living pillars listening. You may have saved my life, he said at last. If that is overstepping, I find I do not mind it. Heat rose to my cheeks, unexpected and unwelcome. I looked away, focusing instead on the charred patch near the dais. The darkness there felt wrong, lingering, as if the attack had left more than a scar on the floor. What was that thing? I asked. The presence inside the stranger. An echo, Mareth answered from behind me. His voice had the weight of old dread, or the first probing of something that has not yet fully crossed our borders. Ilarion's jaw tightened. Our scouts reported disturbances along the northern edge of the forest, he said. Wards weakening without visible cause, creatures refusing to cross certain streams. I had hoped it would be some local corruption we could cleanse, but this was not local, I said quietly. I could still taste the wrongness of it, metallic and cold. No, he replied. This was something that knows us, something that remembers the old wars, and has waited a very long time for the right moment to test our defenses again. Mareth stepped closer, his eyes moving between us. The records of the last bearer of the mark mention a similar disturbance, he said. Shadow-born entities that could ride the wills of others, using them as vessels. They sought the heart of the realm, always. The throne, the borders, the places where decisions are made. Why now? I whispered. Why wait until I was marked? Because the mark is not only a bond to the king, Mareth replied. It is a lantern in the dark. As it awakens, it draws interest, both from those who would protect the realm and from those who would devour it. The thought made my skin prickle. So by simply existing as I am now, I said slowly, I am bait. It would be more accurate to say you are a focal point, Ilarion said. There was a hint of wryness in his tone, though the gravity did not leave his eyes. But yes, that is part of why you must be trained quickly. Your instincts are strong, but instinct without control can be dangerous, to you and to me. I thought of the surge of light, the way it had rushed through the bond without my conscious command. It had worked this time. What if next time it misfired? If I can reach you through the mark, I said carefully. Can you reach me? He hesitated, just for a heartbeat. To a degree, he admitted. When your emotions spike, I feel them as faint echoes. When the mark flares, I sense its direction. But to look through your eyes as you just did through mine would require a deeper merging, one that neither of us is ready for. I was not sure if his words made me more afraid or strangely comforted. The idea of him seeing everything inside me, every doubt and fragile hope, made my chest tighten. But so did the idea of standing alone in front of whatever shadows had reached for him. Mareth cleared his throat softly. With your permission, your majesty, he said. I would like to adjust Lirael's training. The mark has advanced more quickly than anticipated. We should begin exercises in shared sensing and warding. Ilarion nodded. Do it, and increase the patrols around the northern border. Discreetly, I do. Not want panic spreading before we understand the enemy. He turned back to me, his gaze steady. In the meantime, you will not wander the palace alone, he said. Not because I doubt your courage, but because we do not yet know how far the shadows can reach. The mark makes you a beacon. It also makes you a target. A strange defiance rose inside me at that. I did not choose to be either, I said. No, he agreed quietly, but you chose to stand with me instead of running from this. That choice matters, more than you know. Our eyes held for a moment longer, and in that silent exchange, I felt something shift. The grief of the abandoned bride within me did not vanish, but it no longer defined the entire shape of my heart. It made room for something new, not trust, not yet, but the beginnings of a shared purpose. When Mareth and I left the throne hall, the scorch mark still smoked, faintly behind us. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this had been only the first attempt. The next time the shadows came, they might not reach for the king alone. They might come for the marked bond between us, and if I did not learn quickly how to wield this light inside me, The whole realm could pay the price. Sleep became a stranger after the attack on the throne hall. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw those writhing shadows reaching for the king, felt the surge of light tearing out of me through the mark. Even when I was awake, there were moments when the world seemed to thin, as if something pressed its face against the veil between realms and breathed. Mareth increased my training, just as he had warned he would. We began each day before sunrise on the balcony, when the forest was still a dark mass beneath us, and the sky was a wash of indigo. He taught me to anchor myself, to draw strength from the living palace without letting it drown me. "Your fear is not your enemy," he told me one morning, as the mark throbbed in my wrist. "It is a messenger. Listen to what it is trying to protect." "What if it is trying to protect me from the very bond I am supposed to embrace?" I asked. He gave me a long, searching look, then nodded toward the forest. "Then perhaps you and the bond must reach an agreement." I did not understand what that meant until the first time Ilarion joined our training. It was late afternoon, the kind of light that turned the leaves to copper and gold. I had just finished an exercise in sensing disturbances around the palace, when the air shifted in that now familiar way, the bond humming like a plucked string. I turned before he spoke, already knowing he was near. The elf king stepped onto the balcony, leaving the guards outside. In the softer light, he seemed less like a distant symbol, and more like a man bearing weight he could not set down. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, lines of strain that had not been there before. "Mareth," he said, inclining his head. "How fares our bearer?" I bristled at the possessive sound of our, then surprised myself by not rejecting it entirely. "Far better than the records prepared me to expect," Mareth replied, "and yet not nearly well enough for what we may be facing. That is why I am here," Ilarion said. His gaze shifted to me. "We have tested the bond in crisis. It nearly tore itself open to reach me. We must learn how to guide it when there is no immediate threat." I swallowed. "You want to practice what happened in the throne hall, on purpose?" "Yes," he said simply, "because if we do not, the next time it happens, it may not be in our favor." Mareth positioned us opposite each other on the balcony, no more than an arm's length apart. The wind brushed my hair across my face. I tucked it behind my ear with hands that felt too clumsy for my own body. "Take each other's wrists," Mareth instructed. "Left hands, so the marks align." Ilarion extended his hand, waiting. My own moved toward his almost reluctantly, as if some part of me knew that once this line was crossed, there would be no simple turning back. Our fingers closed around each other's wrists. The effect was immediate. The mark flared against his skin and mine, an answering blaze of light. Not outward this time, but inward, coiling around the bond like a ring of fire. My vision blurred at the edges. I forced myself to breathe. "Do not push," Mareth said softly. "Listen, let the bond show you what it wants to share first." At first, there was only the awareness of him. Not thoughts, not words, but a solid, disciplined presence tempered by something deeper and quieter, like grief that had been carried so long it had become part of the bone. Then images rose, unbidden. A younger Ilarion, standing in the moonlit ring, not as king, but as prince. Another beside him, a woman with hair dark as raven's wings and eyes like storms. The air was thick with promise. The moons hung low, spilling silver over both of them. I felt a tenderness that surprised me, not because it existed, but because of how fiercely he tried to keep it contained. Then the scene shifted. The moonlit ring again, but empty. Rain falling in fine, relentless sheets. The prince standing alone in the circle. The priestess watching from the edge with sorrow in her eyes. No bride, no explanation. Only a single discarded ring lying on the wet stone. The ache that surged through him was so sharp that I jerked, tearing my hand back as if burned. The vision snapped, the balcony slamming back into focus. Ilarion staggered slightly, his own breath harsh in his chest. Mareth watched us both, his eyes narrowed, but he said nothing at first. "I am sorry," I managed. "I did not mean to pry. It just came." Ilarion's jaw worked once before he answered. "The mark does not respect the boundaries we attempt to place on ourselves," he said, quietly. "But it seems it has a sense of symmetry." "Symmetry?" I repeated. His gaze met mine, steady and unflinching. "You were abandoned in the moonlit ring," he said. "So was I once, long before the crown, long before this." The words sank into me like roots seeking water. My own memory of standing alone under the moon shivered in response, finding an echo I had not expected in the man who had marked me. "What happened to her?" I asked, before I could stop myself. "She chose another path," he said, his voice controlled, but the bond carried the truth beneath the words. She had not been taken from him by war or death. She had simply chosen someone else, somewhere else, and the realm survived. So did I. The implication settled between us. We had both been left behind in the same sacred circle, at different times, under different moons, and now, somehow, the forest had bound us. Together, Marith cleared his throat, drawing our attention back. The bond showed you more than I intended for a first shared vision, he said, but perhaps it chose well. Shared wounds can be as binding as shared purpose. He turned to me. The shadows that reached for the king will not stop. They have tasted the edges of this bond. They will test its limits. We must too, if we wish to strengthen it before they return. And what of Kaelin? I asked suddenly. His name tasted strange on my tongue after so many days of trying not to speak it. If these shadows seek those closest to the balance of power, then why did they begin with destroying my union instead of striking at the crown directly? Marith and Ilarion exchanged a glance I could not quite read. There is something you have not told me, I said, the realization dawning like cold dawnlight. Ilarion exhaled slowly. I had hoped to be certain before speaking of it, he said. But after the throne hall, there is no more time for half-truths. He gestured, and Marith stepped forward, producing a small, shallow basin carved from translucent stone. He set it on the floor between us. Its surface was dry, but when Ilarion placed his hand over it and spoke a quiet word, water gathered from the air itself, swirling into a still pool. This is a seeing basin, he said. It cannot show us everything, but it can follow threads the mark has already touched. Threads like mine, I murmured. Or like those that once bound you to another, Marith added gently. I knelt beside the basin, my stomach tight. You think Kaelin is involved. We think he is not as absent from the story as his empty place in the ring suggested, Ilarion said. I stared into the water. What do I do? Let the mark remember him, Marith said, without clinging, without trying to rewrite what has happened. Simply acknowledge what was, and let the bond decide what is still connected. It felt like being asked to reopen a wound that had only just scabbed over, but I lowered my marked wrist over the water, closed my eyes, and let memories come. Kaelin laughing as we raced along the river stones, his hand brushing mine as we shared stolen fruit. The warmth in his gaze, or what I had believed was warmth, when our betrothal was announced. The empty space beside me in the moonlit ring. Pain rose, sharp and bright, but I did not flinch away this time. I offered it to the water, to the mark, to whatever ancient balance had decided this was my path. The water stirred. At first, the surface showed only ripples of light. Then shapes formed, a dark forest, denser and harsher than ours, jagged rocks, a sky veiled in ash-gray clouds. And there, standing at the edge of a chasm veined with flickering shadow, was Kaelin. He looked thinner, his eyes hollowed by something more than sleeplessness. Dark strands coiled at his feet like living smoke, winding around his ankles. A figure cloaked in darkness stood beside him, a hand resting on his shoulder. The eyes that turned toward us in the vision were the same cold, alien ones I had seen through the bond during the attack. They glinted with satisfaction. The basin shuddered. A crack shot through the stone. I jerked my hand back just as the image shattered, water spilling across the floor. The mark on my wrist burned like a fresh brand. He did not merely abandon you, Marith said quietly. He was taken and bound by something that seeks to reach us through those we trust. Ilarion's expression hardened. The grief I had glimpsed earlier now joined by a fierce, protective anger. The northern border, he said. That chasm is near the place where the wards first began to fail. I looked up at him, heart pounding. Then we know where they will strike next. And we know who they will use, he replied. They will not be content with sending nameless vessels any longer. They will send someone you once loved to break you, and through you, to break me. For a moment, fear threatened to swallow me whole. The thought of facing Kaelin again, twisted by shadow, cut deeper than any physical wound. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Not the girl who had waited in the moonlit ring for a lover who did not come. Not even the newly marked bearer still reeling from unwanted destiny. Something older, stronger. I will not let them use him to destroy us, I said quietly, or this realm. Ilarion's gaze held mine, the mark on his wrist answering the fire in my own. Then we must go to the border, he said. Together, the shadows will not wait for us to be ready. We will have to make our readiness on the road. I looked out over the forest from the balcony, knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon, darkness was spreading through roots and rivers. The abandoned bride in me grieved. The marked bearer in me burned, and both knew that the next step of this path would decide not only the fate of a king or a realm, but the shape of my own heart. We left the palace at dawn 3 days later, beneath a sky the color of faded steel. The forest greeted us with its familiar chorus of bird song and rustling leaves, but there was a tension under the sounds now, a faint dissonance in the harmony, as if even the roots knew we were heading toward something that did not belong. Our group was small. Ilarion rode at the front on a moonhart, whose antlers glimmered faintly even in daylight. Mareth traveled beside him on a lighter mount, his eyes scanning the trees as if he were reading a book only he could see. I rode just behind them, flanked by 2 guards whose armor had been muted with dark leather to avoid reflecting too much light. This was not a procession. It was a hunt, or a defense. The northern paths were narrower than the roads near the palace. Vines hung low, and the light filtered through the canopy in thinner threads. The farther we went, the more the mark on my wrist prickled, not in the sharp, burning way it had during the attack, but in a constant, needling awareness. "How far are we from the border?" I asked Mareth as we passed a stream where the water moved a bit too slowly. 2 days, if the paths remain clear, he replied. Less if the mark continues to pull as strongly as it is now. It is already tugging you toward the northern flow. It feels like walking with a hand around my wrist, I said. Mareth's gaze flicked to Ilarion. That is not only the border, he said quietly. It is him, Kaelin. I swallowed, focusing on the rhythm of my mount's steps. I had spent years learning the shape of his presence in a room, the sound of his laughter, the way his voice softened when he spoke my name. Now, what reached through the mark was a warped echo of that familiarity. It made my skin crawl and my heart twist at the same time. That night, we made camp in a grove where the trees still stood straight, and the air felt mostly clean. The guards lit a low fire, carefully shielded. Mareth set quiet wards around the perimeter, tracing patterns in the air that glowed faintly before sinking into the ground. I sat a little apart, watching the flames dance. The mark pulsed steadily, keeping its own time. I knew that if I closed my eyes and reached for it, I could seek the thread that led to Kaelin. I also knew that if I did, whatever held him might feel me reaching. Thinking of him, Ilarion's voice came from nearby. I had been so lost in my thoughts that I had not heard his approach. He lowered himself onto the log beside me, leaving enough space that our shoulders did not touch, but close enough that the bond hummed in quiet. Acknowledgement. Yes, I said. There was no point lying. The mark would betray me anyway. For what it is worth, he said, watching the fire. You are allowed to grieve him and still fight him if you must. One does not cancel the other. You speak as if you have done both, I said. A faint smile touched his mouth, humorless but real. The last century has given me many chances to practice complicated loyalties, he replied, and to learn that loving someone is not a shield against seeing what they have become. He did not choose this, I said quickly. You saw the basin. The shadows wrapped around him like chains. Perhaps not at first, Ilarion agreed, but chains rarely fasten themselves without some invitation, even if it is only a whisper of resentment, or a hunger that outweighs caution. The words stung, but not because I believed he was condemning Kaelin. They stung because a part of me knew he was right. If he had wanted to, he could have come to me, I said softly. He could have told me something was wrong. Instead, he left an empty space where he had promised to stand. I stared into the fire until my eyes blurred. I do not know what I will say when I see him, I admitted. I do not know whether I will reach for him or strike. Perhaps you will do both, Ilarion said. Light does not stop being light when it burns as well as warms. I looked at him then, really looked. The fire reflected in his pale eyes, turning them a deeper gold. The bond between us rested quieter than it had in days, not because there was less tension, but because we were no longer pretending it did not exist. Are you afraid? I asked. Yes, he said simply, but not of the shadows. He did not elaborate, and I did not press. The admission settled between us like another log on the fire, deepening its glow. We slept in shifts. When my turn came to rest, I lay under the branching arms of an old oak, watching the stars move slowly through the canopy. Just before my eyes closed, the mark pulsed once, harder than before, and a single image flashed behind my eyelids. Kaelin's face, lit from below by a sickly shifting light, his eyes, hollowed and ringed with shadow, and behind him, the chasm I had seen in the basin, its depths breathing darkness like smoke. When morning came, the air itself felt heavier. The birdsong was thinner here, interrupted by long stretches of silence. Moss grew in strange patterns on the trees, curling into shapes that made my nerves prickle when I looked at them too long. By midday, Mareth raised a hand, signaling for us to halt. Do you feel it? He asked me. I did. It was not the steady pull of the mark anymore. It was a pressure, like a storm front resting just beyond sight. The hairs on my arms rose. My mount shifted uneasily beneath me. "The border is near," Ilarion said. We advanced on foot from there, leaving the mounts with the guards in a sheltered hollow. Mareth walked ahead, his staff lightly touching the ground, testing each step. I walked beside Ilarion, my wrist bare now, the mark exposed. It glowed faintly even in full daylight. The trees thinned. The ground sloped upward, then dropped away. We crested a rise and stopped. Before us yawned the chasm from the vision. It cut across the landscape like a wound, too straight and too deep to be natural. The rock around its edges was cracked and blackened, as if it had been scorched from within. Tendrils of shadow curled up from its depths, dissipating into the air like smoke. The forest near the edge was twisted. Some trees leaned away, their leaves shriveled. Others leaned toward it, bark darkening as if they were being slowly drained. A figure stood at the very rim, Kalen. He wore no armor, only a dark tunic and trousers, but nothing about him was unprepared. The shadows that leaked from the chasm curled around his boots, climbing his legs like affectionate serpents. His hair, once sun-gold like so many of our people, seemed duller now, as if dusted with ash. He turned as we approached, and for a moment, my breath caught. His face was thinner, yes, his cheekbones sharper, but it was still the face I had known. "Lirael," he said. My name came out like a caress and a bruise at once. The mark on my wrist flared, reacting to the connection between us. I felt the bond to Ilarion tighten too, as if bracing. "Kalen," I answered. His gaze flicked to the elf king, then back to me. Shadows deepened at his feet. "So it is true," he said. "The mark chose you, and you let him claim you in the ring." Anger flashed through me, hot and sharp. "You left me in that ring alone," I said. "You chose not to stand there. Whatever has you now, that part was your doing." He flinched, but the movement was small, quickly smoothed away. "You do not understand," he said. "None of you do. The realm is not what you think. The light you cling to is not the only power that sustains us." The shadows his back stirred, coiling higher, almost affectionate. I could feel something behind his words, an otherness watching, listening through his mouth. Ilarion stepped forward, his presence like a pillar at my side. "Release him," he said to the chasm itself, his voice carrying the weight of the crown. "You reached through him only because we once opened our borders to your corruption. That openness is ended." The shadows laughed. There was no sound, but the air shuddered as if struck. Kalen's lips curved in a smile that did not reach his eyes. "You are centuries too late to speak of endings, King," he said. "The roots of what I serve run deeper than your eldest trees. You cannot close what has already burrowed beneath your walls." The mark on my wrist burned. Without thinking, I reached for Kalen through it. Not as I had reached for Ilarion, but as I had once reached for the boy who had helped me cross a rushing stream, who had held my hand when I was afraid of thunder. "Kalen," I said softly, letting memories bleed into my voice. "Do you remember the river on the southern edge of the village? You pulled me from the water when I slipped. You laughed and said you would never let me fall." For a heartbeat, his expression faltered. The shadows roiled angrily around his legs, fighting the hesitation. "I remember," he said, and there, in that single moment, his own voice came through. "I remember wanting to keep you safe from everything. Then why did you leave me?" I asked. His eyes closed, just for a flicker. "Because I thought I had found a way to keep us all safe," he whispered. "They promised." The shadows surged, clamping around his throat like a collar. His eyes flew open, now gleaming with that cold, alien light. The air cracked. A wave of force slammed into us, sending Mareth staggering, driving Ilarion to plant his staff of power into the ground to stay steady. I was thrown to one knee, the edge of the chasm yawning too close. Pebbles slid under my boots, skittering into the darkness below. The mark blazed, not with the soft luminescence I had felt before, but with a fierce, almost painful brilliance. I felt Ilarion's hand clamp around my arm, anchoring me. Our bond snapped open wider than it ever had, flooding me with his strength and his fear and his determination. The shadows recoiled from that combined light, hissing back into the chasm, but not all the way. They regrouped, gathering behind Kalen like a storm cloud. "You cannot take him from us," a voice said. It came from his mouth, and from the chasm, and from everywhere at once. "But we can take you, and through you, him." A spear of pure darkness lanced toward us. I did not have time to think. I lifted my marked wrist. Ilarion's grip locked with mine, and our joined light roared out to meet it. The impact was like colliding storms. Light and shadow collided in a blinding burst that swallowed the edge of the chasm, the trees, the sky. For a heartbeat, I felt everything at once. Kalen's pain, Ilarion's resolve, the hungry rage of the thing in the depths. Then the world tore sideways. I did not fall into the chasm. I fell into the bond. There was only one thought left in me as the darkness tried to drag us all under. If I had been abandoned once under the moonlight, I would not abandon them here. Not Kaelin, not Ilarion, not the realm, even if it meant burning myself away to keep the shadows from taking root. When the world tore sideways, I expected to feel the bite of rock or the endless drop of the chasm. Instead, there was no ground at all, only light and shadow, colliding in waves that roared without sound. I did not fall through air. I fell through memory. The moonlit ring rose around me, its white stones suspended in a vast darkness, as if someone had plucked it from the forest floor and hung it in the sky. One moon glowed silver above, the other tinged with faint gold. Their light spilled down in two distinct paths. Between them, the chasm yawned, not of stone this time, but of pure absence, a wound in the world. On one side of the ring stood Ilarion, his crown of living branches glimmering, his eyes steady, his presence like a rooted tree in a storm. On the other side stood Kaelin, shadows twining up his legs, his face marked by exhaustion and a desperate, brittle defiance. The thing in the chasm spoke through him. Its voice crawled under my skin. "You cannot hold both," it said, using his mouth, bending his features into a cruel smile. "The king and the traitor, the crown and the lost love. Your heart is a doorway, little bearer. It must open to one side or the other." The mark on my wrist blazed. Its light streaked out, forming lines of gold that linked me to Ilarion and to Kaelin both. I could feel Ilarion's strength pouring along one thread. Disciplined, steady, burning with a quiet determination not to lose me to the dark. On the other thread, I felt Kaelin's turmoil, guilt like broken glass, fear like a hand around his throat, and beneath the corruption, a flicker of the boy who had once pulled me from a river. I stood at the center of the ring, the place where I had been abandoned and claimed, heart pounding, breath coming in shallow bursts. "I am not a doorway," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I am not something to be used to pass from one power to another. I am a person. I am Lirael." The shadows recoiled, amused and dismissive. "You are a root," the thing replied. "Roots feed what they are buried in. You will feed me." It surged upward, tendrils of darkness reaching to wrap around the golden lines that bound me to the two men. I felt it latch onto my connection with Kaelin first, greedily drinking in his shame and my lingering love, twisting them into something sharp. Memories flooded me. Kaelin's laugh, the way he had looked at me when he thought no one was watching, the empty space beside me in the moonlit ring. Each one, the shadow tried to poison. He never loved you. He only used you. He was always mine. For a heartbeat, the pain was staggering. It would have been easier to let anger harden around it, to cut that thread entirely and let Kaelin fall into the chasm with the thing that held him. It would have been cleaner, simpler. But I thought of the basin, of the moment when his own voice had broken through, whispering that he had wanted to keep me safe. I thought of how fear had always been his weakness, not cruelty. Fear of not being enough, fear of failing those he loved. I drew a breath, tasting ash and moonlight. "You did not get him by strength," I said to the shadows. "You got him by lying to his fear." Then I turned, not away from Kaelin, but fully toward him. I poured every true memory I had into the bond, the warmth of his hand, the vows we had spoken as children in jest, the way he had once stood between me and a charging stag with nothing but a stick in his hand. "Kaelin," I said, and this time I spoke not as the abandoned bride, but as the woman who had chosen to come to this border, knowing he might be lost. "I will not lie about what you did. You left me. You broke your promise. You let this thing use you to hurt our home. But I also will not lie about what you were before that. You were kind. You were brave. You loved me in your flawed, frightened way." The shadow hissed, thrashing against the golden line between us. "I release you from the promise you made to me in the moonlit ring," I said. "I will not be your anchor if all you want is to drag us both down. But if there is anything left in you that still wants to stand in the light, then stand now. Not for me, for yourself, for the realm you once swore to protect." For a moment, nothing changed. Then, slowly, Kaelin's eyes shifted. The alien gleam in them flickered, warred with something softer. His jaw clenched. The shadows at his feet tightened like chains, pulling. "Arenion," he whispered. It was the childhood name he used to use for the king when we were young, when Ilarion had been a distant, almost mythical figure. "Tell me the truth. Can this be undone?" On the other side of the ring, Ilarion's gaze met mine across the chasm. Through the bond, I felt the weight of his answer before he spoke it. Not without cost, he said. His voice did not hide the sorrow. But yes, corruption is not the same as creation. It does not have the first claim on any heart, not even yours. The thing in the chasm screamed. The sound was not in the air. It was in my bones. The shadows whipped around Kalen, trying to cover his eyes, his mouth, his ears. I stepped forward, into the exact center of the ring. The mark on my wrist erupted in blinding light, not merely gold now, but threaded with silver from the moon and green from the heart of the forest. The lines connecting me to Alarian and Kalen thickened, becoming roots, branches, a living network of light. You want a root? I said to the darkness. Fine, take this. I drove the light downward. It plunged into the chasm, not as a spear, but as a tree, its roots seeking the deepest parts of the wound. I felt Alarian pour his strength into me, accepting my lead without trying to take it from me. I felt Kalen for the first time stop pulling away and push with us instead. The shadow writhed, biting at the roots, trying to infect them. For a heartbeat, I felt it find every fracture in me, the part that still hurt from being left, the part that feared I was only valuable because of the mark, the part that doubted I could ever be more than a vessel for someone else's power. I did not fight those fractures. I acknowledged them. Yes, I am hurt. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I have doubted my own worth, but I am still here. The moment I accepted that, the light did something new. It did not try to erase the fractures. It flowed into them, like water filling cracks in dry earth. The more honest I was about my brokenness, the stronger the light became. The chasm shuddered. The shadows shrieked, shrinking back as the roots of light took hold. Around us, I felt the forest lean in, the weight of countless leaves and branches and streams adding their quiet strength. The realm had decided. With a final wrenching pull, the tree of light anchored itself deep in the wound. The chasm began to knit, its edges drawing together around the glowing roots. The darkness was forced downward, compressed, sealed. It did not vanish entirely, but it no longer had room to reach upward unchecked. Kalen cried out. The shadows around him burned away in the light, leaving him collapsing to his knees, gasping. The tether between him and the chasm snapped, leaving a scar on his spirit I could feel even from where I stood. The ring, the moons, the suspended realm of bond and memory wavered, then shattered like glass. I slammed back into my body on the edge of the real chasm, lungs empty, vision white. Alarian's arms were around me, holding me to him as if he were afraid that if he let go, I would tumble into the depths. The mark on my wrist was a searing point of heat between us. Air rushed back into my chest. I coughed, blinking until the world steadied. The chasm was still there, but narrower now. Its edges were laced with pale, living roots that glowed faintly, like veins of captured dawn. The shadows that rose from it were wisps, not claws, contained. Kalen lay near the rim, unmoving. Mareth knelt beside him, fingers pressed to his throat. After a long, heavy moment, he looked up. He lives, Mareth said, but what has been torn in him will not mend quickly, or completely. I eased out of Alarian's hold, though his hands lingered on my shoulders a breath longer than necessary. My legs shook as I crossed the short distance to Kalen and knelt beside him. His face, without the shadows twisting through it, looked younger and older. His eyes fluttered open. When they focused on me, there was no alien gleam in them, only raw, aching clarity. Lirael, he whispered, I heard you, in the dark. I thought you would let me fall. I almost did, I said softly. Honesty seemed the only thing worthy of this moment, but I could not spend the rest of my life wondering if there had been enough of you left to save. Tears gathered in his eyes. I cannot ask you to forgive me, he said. I cannot ask you to love me as you once did. I broke what we had. I let my fear open the door to something that nearly devoured us all. I will not love you as I once did, I said. The words hurt, but they were true. But I will not carry hatred for you either. The realm has taken its due in scars. Let that be punishment enough. What you do with the life that is left to you, that will be your atonement. He nodded, a small broken motion. I will go north, he said, beyond this border, where the wards are weakest. I will spend what days I have shoring up what I helped to break. You will not go alone, Mareth said quietly. No one who has wrestled with such darkness should be left entirely to their own thoughts. I rose, swaying. Alarian was there before my balance could fail, his hand at my back, steady and warm. The bond between us hummed softly, no longer wild and uncontrolled, but no longer dormant either. We returned to the palace as the forest slowly exhaled. The twisted trees near the chasm began, little by little, to straighten. Streams that had run sluggishly cleared. The wards at the border glowed stronger, where the roots of light had taken hold. Word of what had happened traveled faster than we did. By the time we passed through the palace gates, eyes followed us not with simple curiosity, but with something like reverence. In the days that followed, Marith confirmed what we already knew in our bones. The mark had changed. Its pattern on my wrist now included a third, faint star near the branching lines, a reminder of the life we had pulled back. From the edge, "The bond between you and the king is no longer a question," Marith said one evening on the balcony. "It is an answer to an old wound in the realm, to an old wound in both your hearts." That night, under twin moons that seemed brighter than they had in years, Aelarian asked me to walk with him to the moonlit ring. The clearing was quiet when we arrived, the moonbells chiming softly in the branches. The white stones of the ring glowed gently, no longer stained by the memory of abandonment, but still marked by it. I stood at the center again, feeling the echo of the girl I had been. Aelarian joined me there, his crown faintly luminous, his eyes reflecting both moons. "We were both left here once," he said. "You by a man who could not face his own fear. I by a woman who chose a different path. The forest watched us both walk away alone. And now?" I asked. "Now," he said, taking my marked wrist in his. "The forest watches us choose to stand here together, not because prophecy says we must, not because the mark demands it, but because, after everything we have seen, we finally understand that some bonds are not chains. They are roots, and roots do not imprison. They hold." His words settled in my chest like a lantern being lit. I looked up at him, at the man who had carried the weight of the crown alone for so long, who had opened his strength to me without trying to swallow mine, who had trusted me to choose even when that choice could have cost him his life. "I will not promise you that I will never be afraid again," I said. "I will not promise that I will never falter. But I will promise this. I will not run, not from you, not from this bond, not from the work we have to do." He smiled then, not the distant, formal expression of a king, but something warmer and more human. "Then let the moons witness this," he said. "We were abandoned at the Moonlit Betrothal, but from this night on, we are not defined by who left us. We are defined by who we chose to become." The mark on my wrist glowed in answer, its light twining with the pulse of the forest, the soft music of the moonbells, the steady beat of Aelarian's heart so close to mine. I had been abandoned once under the moonlight. Now, I stood marked by the Elf King, not as a possession, but as a partner, a guardian, and a woman who had finally found her own place in the story of the realm. And for the first time, the future did not feel like a path someone else had written. It felt like a road we would walk together, roots and light and choice all woven into one.